Reddit. What's your family's dark secret? NSFW. My mom was raped when she was 14. Her dad, my granddad, tracked the guy down and shot him dead in a bar. My grandparents swapped spouses. My grandmother on my mother's side had an affair with my grandfather on my father's side. Everyone got divorced and then my grandfather on my mother's side fell in love and married my grandmother on my father's side. Family reunions were fun. My great-grandfather was a Christian Scientist minister. They believe that the mind can cure the body, and he told the family of a girl with diabetes, a treatable disease, to pray the sickness away. The girl soon died and the girl's father killed my great-grandfather in a murderous rage. My uncle was investigated for the Green River killings. Years later he was investigated for the Spokane prostitute murders. He was good friends with Yates, who was found guilty, and his saliva was found on a beer can near a dumping site. When I was a little girl, my mom told me to never get in his car if he tried to pick me up. Funny enough, he sells life insurance. A super distant uncle in my family used to get in a lot of trouble with cops. My nan and great aunt used to hide him, once hiding him in a freezer while cops searched the house. One day he ended up kidnapping an ambassador. Successfully ransomed him off. Tried escaping the country via boat, but the captain realized he was a crook and tried to take him to the cops. Distant uncle instead holds captain at gunpoint and dives off the boat several kilometers off land. Police never found him and assumed he drowned. Decades later my nan got a letter from him, confirming to all of us he was alive and well. My great aunt had a second child and gave it up for adoption because she was a newly single woman and didn't think she could provide for both kids. This apparently caused a lot of drama in our family back in the 70s and people stopped talking to each other over it. My generation never heard a single word of any of this. Then, one day, my mom calls me to tell me about my new cousin. I was baffled and figured someone had a kid. Nope. That little girl that was given up for adoption was now in her 40s and hired a private investigator to find her biological family. She's since been assimilated into the family and I see her regularly at family events. My grandfather died in 1946. Before my dad was even born. We were always told he drove his truck into a ditch while drunk, fell asleep, and asphyxiated when the tailpipe got clogged with mud. He was in his early 30s at the time. Well, I got into genealogy a couple of years back and found a bunch of records and newspaper articles about the incident. Turns out grandpa wasn't alone in the truck. He was with an underage girl, less than half his age, who also died alongside him. Obviously, this was not my grandmother. The newspapers didn't say it explicitly, but there was heavy insinuation that there was some side of the road romance happening when the fumes apparently overtook both of them. I still haven't told my dad what I found. Not sure I ever will. My grandfather went away to fight in Vietnam and when he came back my grandma was pregnant with my mom. We never knew who her real dad was. Birth mum was a prostitute. Adoptive mum tried to kill my dad with rat poison. Grandmother was a thief. Her brother was killed by their father. My dad's brother is a pedophilic sex offender. Was caught with over 52,000 images of CP on his computer, as well as bragging about abusing children as young as 5. My granddad was into dating students before it became something people lost their job over. That's how our family got started. He taught, then gave extra credit to my grandmother. As far as I know, only my mother and I, possibly my stepfather but I'm not sure, know that my real father wasn't some guy my mom dated in college but a stranger who grabbed her and assaulted her. I didn't even know this until she told me when I was a teenager. On my father's side, my grandfather and my father are both guilty of incest rape. My father is the only one who has been found out though. He took a deal to register as a sex offender. Only because my little brother and sister were about to testify about what he did to them. The family still defended him, their precious boy, and they shunned my aunt for believing her own daughter when she outcried that he had raped her. I of course do not keep in touch, but he is now with a woman who's completely brainwashed that he is innocent, with a young 6/7-year daughter. Poor child. My great-grandmother was married to her first husband, an Italian mobster in New York, in the early 1920s. They had 4 kids. In 1928, 6 years after they were married, she disappeared and no one in the family knew what happened to her. They all quietly assumed her husband had her killed, as it was known he was very abusive to her. Nope. She ran off with my great-grandfather. They moved to Philadelphia and had changed their last names. They were always very secretive about their past. No one knew the original family names or where they had come from. Until I took a DNA test and matched with a third cousin that was descended from her first set of children. Her original 4 children were sent to orphanages because a first husband couldn't take care of them. It was a big surprise for both families and some very hurt feelings for the children she had abandoned. They are in their 90s but it affected them their entire lives. I am distantly related to the Unabomber. My dad is abusive and keeps my mother in debt so she can't take us and leave. We look like a perfect middle class family from the outside but boy is it on the inside. Grandparents on my stepmother's side paid a hitman to take out my father. Luckily the guy had morals. He met my father and after talking to him a bit ended up telling him what he was originally there for and that he was going to return the money. My grandmother had an affair with my aunt's high school boyfriend's father. It became very awkward when my aunt married said boyfriend and had a kid with him. Why? Because my grandmother married said boyfriend's father. My aunt now has a kid with her stepbrother. Before the days of Ancestry.com and whatnot, my cousin and his wife went to Ireland with idyllic intentions of tracing our family heritage. They never spoke of it again. Until years later when they admitted it repeatedly dead-ended at mental hospitals and jails and they got so discouraged they quit. My family was smuggling diamonds in the Apeldoorn area of the Netherlands from the late 1800s up until WW2. They got pretty rich off it too until the Nazis invaded and took most of them into concentration camps. My great-grandfather, while on the trains to a camp, convinced himself and several others to jump from the trains. As they did they were gunned down by Nazi soldiers and my great-grandfather was one of the only survivors. One of my aunties was a very ill woman, like oxygen to get out of the chair. Going upstairs is a 1 a week thing if lucky. Her son is a prick. When she refused to pay his drug debt off for the nth time because she had no more money, he poured petrol all over the house and threatened to burn her to death. The fumes were enough for her to pass out. He panicked, took a handful of pills, then panicked at that decision and called himself an ambulance. Didn't even mention his mum. Police turned up with the paramedics, arrested him and took her in the ambulance. I disowned him instantly. My mother is light-skinned because my grandma was raped by a white man. I found out at my grandma's wake. We had always been told we were part Native American. My grandfather raped and abused my mom and my uncle through their childhood. My grandma covered it all up and he never went to jail. They live next door to us. My grandma's ex-boyfriend got put in jail for murder BC. He killed a dude that also liked her. Also, she and my granddad would have quickies during TV commercial breaks. My parents' cousin was a prostitute in the early 1990s and when she died from STDs in 2000 my mother inherited $9,373 from prostitution. She spent it on raising me ironically. My great-grandmother supposedly summoned the devil to have my great-grandfather murdered. It's an old urban legend, but if you met her, it might not seem far off considering she's quite the strange old woman and has a voice like that of that little midget lady from Poltergeist but in Spanish. My grandfather broke it off with his first wife because she got knocked up by my grandfather's brother, who was his also married, while my grandfather was deployed during the Malayan emergency. He had stress and anxiety issues the entire time I knew him and I know it cost a part of himself to forgive his brother to keep the family together. The worst part? She named the kid after my grandfather. Tried to pass him off as a junior. The kid is now in his 50s and is in prison. Selling prison art. Me. So my biological father had me out of wedlock. No one in his family knows about me, that I know of. I've never met any of them. And the last time I talked to him he asked me to stay away because it would ruin his marriage reputation. Honestly, I don't care that much. I didn't meet him until I was like 23, so by that point it's not like anything had really changed in my life other than another blip in my life. I've got way worse stories and issues going on, so it's a fairly minor blip at that. I've actually got a sister and niece that I've never met, but I've internet stalked a couple of times. I sent her $50 anonymously through GoFundMe a while back. But I doubt I'll ever contact her. There's no way I'd ever send a "Hey, it's me, your brother." I don't know if our dad ever mentioned it, but he knocked up my mom about 30 years ago. What the duck is wrong with the grandparents here? Reading this thread really makes me grateful for my family, however flawed they are. That one cousin isn't actually your cousin. Your aunt was pregnant by another man and your uncle knew and married your aunt anyway, so her family wouldn't disown her. She looks like a thumb and is dumber than a bag of hammers. My grandpa killed himself when my mom was very young. Her alcoholic mother decided making her 6-year-old, my mom, help clean the blood and brains off the wall was a good idea, and giving her a beer for helping even better. My great-grandma claimed for a long while that she was a virgin, which was why she adopted my grandmother, but I later found out that she had multiple miscarriages. IDK if that qualifies as dark, but it's definitely sad. RIP great-grandma. My great-great-grandfather once got into a fight at a bar over a woman and murdered a man and said fight. It being the late 1800s. He moved a couple states south and changed his surname. Which is how a family of European Spanish mutts ended up with a Scottish surname. My mother is batted crazy. Her sisters know but just go on as if she doesn't really exist. None of us see her. She sometimes calls her younger sister to whine about her boyfriend. She'll be 77 soon, the guy's 50. They all ignored the fact that I was being severely neglected. That she was going through boyfriends at a rapid rate, every single one was an alcoholic addict and abusive as hell. I once asked my aunt through email if they had ever tried to do anything. Did anybody call social services? Or even talk about doing it? She emailed back, "I wish you luck in your search." My family knows what happened with the Skidmore, Missouri murder. My dad met my mom when he was getting a divorce. She was his divorce lawyer : My parents had a kid outside of wedlock and then put him up for adoption. This might not seem super dark, but to a Christian 15-year-old boy it shattered my reality. I think about him almost every day, knowing that I have a brother out there that I've never, and might never meet. Turns out my grandfather had been molesting my aunts as kids and other female cousins of mine. Finally one of them mentioned it to her husband and he called him and said, "Either turn yourself in or I'm calling the cops," or something similar. Now my grandpa is in prison. Totally out of nowhere for me too. He also said that if more victims came forward he wouldn't deny it. Mostly pissed that if you really think about it he got away with it. He's in prison now, sure, but he was already dying. So just now on his deathbed he finally goes to prison for what he did. Also pissed that no one in my family seems to care and they're all trying to make excuses for him.